and getting ready to graduate from college, applied to pilot training with the Air Force, and ended up in pilot training December of 70. We filled out our dream sheets and wanted to, for requests for assignment. And I asked for a FAC assignment to Southeast Asia. And of course, the Air Force, seeing the wisdom of my choice, gave me that assignment. And I ended up in August of 1970 at Cameron Bay for a week of orientation. And during that week, we were told about the war and the cultural aspects of Vietnam. And the last day, couple of days, they went through the description of the Tactical Air Support Squadron, the TASs, and what each does in their area of operation and so forth. But one of them they mentioned was Nakhon Phanom, Thailand, where your only choice really was to fly out over the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which was a pipeline of supplies from North Vietnam down into Laos, down along the border of Vietnam and into Vietnam. So I thought, I would rather be at Nakhon Phanom, Thailand than in Vietnam, actually, and I asked for that assignment, not realizing fully what it meant in terms of the anti-aircraft artillery that you faced daily and nightly out over the trail. And anyway, I was all excited about doing that, asked for that as a number one choice, Da Nang number two. And then a major came into the room. And he said, there's one other thing that I'd like to tell you about, just to put into the back of your head, is that there's another assignment that it's called the Steve Canyon program. And of course, for those people, and we were all in that age group where we remembered the Steve Canyon cartoon of the papers after World War II, and that put all kinds of images in our minds. And he said that it was one that would only take the most motivated and the most talented of the FACs, and that you had to reach a certain number of flying hours during your time in 6 months in country or wherever you're flying. And I thought about that, and probably not many other people in that group that went through that orientation gave it a second thought. I was hooked. I mean, that was just, I took the bait altogether. And so for the next 6 months, everything I did thinking about that program and knowing very little about it. Happens to be that Nakhon Phanom, working out over into Laos, a lot of the Ravens came out of NKP. And so I had a chance to talk to a couple of guys, and it was a very tightly controlled, top secret project, and not much they'd really say except that these guys came down wearing civilian clothes, wearing all of this gold, long hair, and I thought, this is right up my alley. And anyway, I got the 6 months, and I met the flying time, and I put my application in, and I had to, of course, go to everybody in my chain of command, from my squadron or flight commander all the way to the squadron commander up through the wing commander, and get a recommendation, and filled all that out, sent it in, and then waited. And I don't remember exactly when it was. About a month later, a major came down, and we did some interviewing and went out. He flew a mission, which was the last day flight, out over the trail, still the dry season. And I felt sorry for him because I don't think that he had ever seen the guns, but we found traffic moving, and I called for some TAC Air, which was Tactical Air Command's fighters, and maybe Navy there. But anyway, we got some fighters, and the gunners started shooting, and this poor major just had a meltdown and asked me to pack it up and go home. So I passed it off to the incoming nighttime FAC, and we went back. And I thought, the way he reacted, I may not have a prayer now. And it was 3 months later that I actually got a call to go to the Ravens. And I reported to the 1st Detachment of the 56th Special Operations Wing, and my briefing with the commander of the squadron there started out and was just exactly what I was looking for. He said, you're going to go, but the first thing you're going to do when you finish briefing here is you're going to go back to your room, take off your uniform, put on civilian clothes, pack anything military up except your ID, and ship it home. And he said when you get to Vientiane and the embassy, they'll take your ID card and they'll give you a embassy card to carry instead. And then he went on kind of generally describing what was expected of me. Stop and think about it for a minute. You've requested highly motivated, very talented facts. And all of my years of working with the Forest Service, doing topographic maps in college and reading maps out over fires and various things that I worked with the Forest Service, reading a map, finding targets, visualizing what the enemy would do, how they could move things down trails or off roads, and where they would look for paths. I mean, it all, topographical map was like reading a book. It made infinite sense to me. And you're taking people like this, you're taking their uniform away, you're telling them, here's an airplane, go up and fight this war. Your objective is to work with the Hmong, the Laotian, whatever group, and do the best job you can. Don't call us, we'll call you. I did my checkout in the 01 and got on a Air America helicopter, went up to the embassy. It was kind of the tail end of the wet season, and it was flooding up in Vientiane, and we landed at a soccer field not very far from the embassy. And when I got out, a Frenchman was taking pictures, and I asked the crewman, I said, what's the deal over here? Here's all this stuff, super secret, and guys taking pictures. And he said, that's a French commie photographer. He said, very shortly, your picture will be there with the KGB and the Chi-Coms and the Pathet Lao, and it's not like they won't know who you are now. So anyway, that was an interesting sidelight. I went to the embassy and began the end processing, and they did take my ID and give me an embassy card in place of it, which I carried for the rest of the time. And then my assignment was going to be at Luong Prabang, the ancient royal capital, which is kind of next door to Long Chin. The eastern side of my working area was the western edge of the Plain of Jars. And anyway, 2 days later, I went up to LP and, introduced myself to everybody, and we got started making maps, which, I have an example. And anyway, we flew around. I was going to take another Raven by the name of Jim Roper. I was going to take his place, and he flew me and Craig Bradford around. We looked at some of the sites where we were going to work out of and met the case officers in charge of them, and then I put in 2 or 3 airstrikes, and I was checked out. I mean, I was a Raven ready to go, and I knew nothing about anything, But there I was in Laos now, and I was looking at the future, after seeing all the guns that there were down along the trail, to be in an area that was mostly small arms and occasional 12.7 millimeter, 50 cal, basically, machine guns, except the Chinese road, which was AAA and some radar controlled. Another story about that probably in a few minutes. But anyway, there I was in Laos. Working for the embassy, the top of our chain of command there would be the ambassador, and probably more direct would be the air attaché, and then the senior fac, or the chief fac that worked there in the embassy would be the other. And then out in the field, we worked with our senior fac, the guy. In our case, it would be Raven 10, and that it would be something 0 in any of the other military regions that it worked. But that's basically how our command structure went. But the ambassador was he had control of virtually everything, even a lot of the operations the CIA wanted to run. He had final say, yay or nay, on that. So now we're looking back about 40-something years. But and you're probably going to ask this of other people you interview, and depending on the areas where you work, like over in the Plain of Jars, where ravens got shot down frequently, and there were quite a few killed over there. I mean, it really upsets everything. But yeah, and it happened in my area, but it was a mid-air that killed another raven, and kind of really turned things upside down. But prior to that, we had 2 airplanes and a T-28, so we would have 3 of us out, and we would typically go to a briefing at 5:30 in the morning. By 6:30, we're firing the airplanes up, and we've already talked among ourselves whether someone's going to go up in the northern part, somebody's going over to Ban Hui Sai or over to Xing Lom over on the western edge of our operating areas, or where exactly we're going to work so that we don't conflict. And then when we're calling for T-28s, they'll know who they're going to be working with and where they're going. So that would go on until we come back about 3 hours, get fuel and rockets, or maybe sooner if we're really putting in a lot of airstrikes and we need ordnance. But you'd take maybe a short break for a lunch and then back out, and by 3:30 that would be your last flight out. Maybe if there was nothing really going on, you might just pull quit at 3:30 or thereabouts, and then dinner and briefings. And sometimes we'd go over to the CIA office, the cave, and talk to case officers there about things that we saw and targets that we were looking at. And it's one of the interesting aspects of the war is that you weren't getting briefings by an intel officer who said usually reliable sources have pinpointed targets here. You're usually reliable American sources having a beer with you right across the counter there, and he happens to be a case officer, and he's got patrols out, and they have found a cave, and here you are. And it was a very personal war. I mean, you ate and drank with the pilots that you're going to be working with tomorrow. So when one of those got shot down or had to bail out, I mean, it was a very personal war. You had to work as hard as they worked, because they're there for the duration. They fly till they die. We're there for a specified period of time, but we volunteered to be there. They picked motivated, highly talented facts, and you got out, you worked. I mean, you flew. If you can imagine, and for all the pilots who may see this at some time, get in your airplane, fly up 1,500 feet, put binoculars to your eyes while you're looking out the side window, and fly your airplane. And I mean, you did it. You did it all day long. Well, it's there could be 2 situations of flights that you'd look at. I mean, we didn't have a lot of roads in the area where I worked. It was river traffic primarily. But along those rivers, we had what was called hard sites. You would have your place that these patrols would work out of, and when you flew out to an area, you'd have a backseater with you. Now, at Luong Prabang, basically they carried our call sign, and so when they called it, they would just say, ask for the ground commander, and say, this is Raven 1-2 or Raven, and we would make contact. He would make contact with the people on the ground, and so that you're not getting any kind of trying to learn Laotian, they're trying to learn English. A lot of mistakes can be made. So anyway, he'd make a contact, they'd give us coordinates, we'd go over and look, and maybe you're finding mortar pits, and then you call in the T-28. Now in our area, the T-28 pilots spoke excellent English. I mean, we could talk directly to them. Sometimes when things were going so hot and heavy, the backseater would translate, because it's just, for the T-28 pilots, it was faster. You'll have to ask people over, who flew with the Hmong T-28 pilots, but knowing what I know of them now, they spoke just as good English as the pilots I worked with. So then when you have your T-28s over the top of you, and they've got everybody identified, you've got the target, you've given them a briefing of, safe bailout and all of the various things that we had to do, the wind as we knew it on the ground and what the target is. And they would have us in sight, and we'd say we're rolling in to mark the target, and then you would pull the airplane up, bleed off some airspeed, roll it down, pick up the target in, if you had a pipper, but we didn't. We used second rivet on the windscreen. Pretty basic war here. And you'd fire a smoke rocket, what we call the Willie Pete or white phosphorus. And when it hit the ground, it'd explode, and there would be a white cloud that would come up. And if you got a good mark in, well, you'd give say, hit my smoke, or maybe give a correction, 25, 30 meters away. And then the T-28s would start in, and you'd move off to one side. And you're flying the airplane so that as the T-28's coming in, you've got him in sight all the way down and around. You clear him, and he goes in and pulls off. Number two's coming in, and now you've got him. It's just a ballet. I mean, it's choreographed just so smoothly that at times, you really don't think about what you're doing. You're not looking at anything in the airplane. The airplane tells you everything you need to know. If you're building up airspeed, if you're slowing way down, if you're, way out of coordination. I mean, there's nothing in the airplane you really needed to look at. You're looking at the pilot, you're looking at the plane, you're looking at the target, you're looking at ground fire. If you're getting ground fire, especially if it's, anti-aircraft artillery, you're really watching that. But small arms, you'd be at 1,500 or more feet, and you're kind of basically out of the range. Once in a while, you'll hear bullets snap by, and you're thinking they're getting a little bit too close here. And anyway, that's basically what would go on with the airstrike. And when they're finished, they've dropped all their bombs, and you tell them, let me take a look, and you go over and look down and see if they hit the target, and then you give them what's called bomb damage assessment, BDA, and you tell them they've got a target or whatever, how whatever the target is, how it's destroyed or whether it is or not. And they go home, and you continue working with the ground commander. Or now if it's a TIC, troops in contact, let me tell you, things can get hot and heavy. You can have fighters checking in, you can have T-28s checking in, you might have helicopters coming in to pick up wounded, and you've got a grease pencil, and you're sitting there on the window, and you're writing everybody down, and you're telling, Mustang Red, you've got 2,500 feet, Mustang Blue, 3,000 feet, Air America, hold off to the northwest, let me get this fighter in and out. Yeah, and then, you're cleared in, then you got your guys, and they're saying we're getting low on fuel, and you're saying, all right, you got things going on. Your aux tank just burned, your auxiliary fuel tank just burned dry, and now you're reaching up to change tanks and get things going, and, it's busy. I mean, let me tell you, time goes that fast, but that's a typical airstrike time period. That might be 3 hours right there that seemed like it was about 15 minutes. Well, I can think of three in particular, but one that was most interesting was that we were working a hard side up the what's called the Nam, water, or the river U, which runs northeast out of Luong Prabang. And anyway, we had some troops in contact, and I had a Mustang Blue flight of 4, and we were putting in the airstrike, and I guess Mustang Blue caught a bullet in the engine, and next thing I know, it went from very smooth and coordinated, everything in English, to nothing in English except me screaming, what's going on? And Mustang Blue had punched out of his helicopter, or his airplane, and the plane had crashed, and then I saw the smoke from him, and he came up on the radio on his we call it SAR radios, they're search and rescue emergency radios, and made contact with him. And he's basically talking to my back seater, and I've called the ABCCC, Airborne Command and Control Center, and I told them I had a pilot down, and they sent, which I thought was pretty amazing, but over on the Plain of Jars, over at next door to me, they usually had Air Force assets, you know, on search and rescue standby all the time. And anyway, they sent 4 A1s and 2 H-53 helicopters over to me to pick this Laotian up. And when he checked in, I thought, well, this is pretty amazing. I had Air America stacked up, but ground fire was just way too hot. And Mustang Blue was telling me where they were coming from, and I was trying to work the rest of Mustang Blue's flight on the targets down there when the A1s checked in. And they're supposed to take command of the situation when they show up. And so now you can imagine what it's like. They don't have Laotian backseaters, and I'm trying to translate for them and turn this whole thing over to them. And I got some of the A1s down with their guns, and they were hosing an area where they were shooting in an area where these bad guys was chasing Mustang Blue, and he had put out a smoke. And anyway, I mean, it was crazy in there. And this Laotian, Seo, who flew a H-34 helicopter, flew up the Namu River, and through all of that ground fire, he flew in there and picked up Mustang Blue, turned around and flew out. And then he calls me, and I have to tell these A1s and these H-3 helicopters and Air America and everybody else, the SARS over, that you know, this H-34 had picked them up. Laos itself is such a beautiful country. I mean, one time when I was way up the Namu by Nam Khan, I went into a valley and I told myself, you know, I ever get a chance to come back here, I'm going to do it. So I went back with a guy, 2002, and we went up almost all the way to Pansali, you know, which is right on the Chinese border, and we saw those valleys, and we saw the you know, villages, and we went to a lot of the places where I worked, and you know, I love that country. Well, you know, we're working in a country where 3 presidents denied our involvement. Ambassador Godley at one point, he said he's not aware of any bombing in Laos, and yet we've dropped more bombs on Laos than we did Germany in World War II. You know, and when people went down, you know, were shot down for so long, it was covered up as a training flight, a reconnaissance mission, you know, some real nebulous thing, just sound like somebody out over another place. And so, you know, you had to be cautious what you told people, but on the other hand, you know, one of the common threads with the Ravens is that we all wanted to fight this war. We all had our ideas and our visions of how to do it, and nobody was there to really tell us that we couldn't do what we're doing. And you know, I think as some of the other Ravens give their stories, you'll see what I mean about this. But you know, the way the war was fought, I mean, in Vietnam, you had so many people looking over their shoulders, and some people just wanted to be there for the 1 year, get their little square on their, you know, efficiency report as having been to combat in Vietnam, and get their end of tour medal and go home. And so consequently, if you're going to do something that might put a blemish on their record, they're going to stop you from doing it. And the things, I mean, people will tell you stories about coming back from missions, and it's hot and humid, and sleeves are rolled up, and you know, whatever, and officers coming over telling you to, you know, get your sleeves down and your uniform, you know, zip that button, you know, that zipper, and button that button. and you're thinking, you know, this isn't what the war is all about. Well, no, none of that up in Laos. I mean, there are times you had to send a request in for certain kinds of ordnance through the embassy, which then went to Blue Chip in Saigon. I mean, you had to kind of play some of that war. But, you know, when you're going to go up and they're going to turn you loose and you're going to fight a secret war, you better be motivated. You better have an idea what you want to do. You're not going to stay home in bed. And let me tell you, you're up in the morning to get that first ordnance coming in, and you've got a list of targets in the back of your mind or written in your little ledger book so that, you know, if somebody surprises you, yeah, you got a target right over here, you know. I mean, that was just the way you fought. There wasn't any clearing all these targets with everybody. I mean, you know, you talked, you know where the good guys are and the bad guys, and, you know, and the other half of the story, which maybe isn't all that good, is, you know, our hair got long, our attitude was bad, and end up going down to Vientiane for some combat time off, and, you know, you drank a lot. And if you were in Vientiane, everybody kind of understood. You get down to Udorn, and now you're getting into more military, and people are not quite as forgiving, you know, and you run into problems. The U.S. and the CIA were very nervous about this whole thing, but, you know, and General Vang Pao, he was approached by Bill Lair, and Bill asked whether he could, you know, I mean, and part of the pressure of the whole thing was yeah, the domino theory, but, you know, the Hmong had worked with the French, and, you know, in Dien Bien Phu, and they're in Laos, and, you know, there's going to be some retribution from the Pathet Lao, and so, you know, Vang Pao was thinking that, you know, he would have his people and he would fight, but they would fight from the mountaintops. And when Bill Lair made you know, an offer of arms and things like that, it was kind of a match that all comes together. And you know, he puts together 10,000, and, you know, there was another period right there, and well, maybe that was around 58, but about 68, at the end of the dry season, you know, and General Vang Pao says that he thinks he can put together another 1,000 people, and you know, he could only find 300, and of that, 60% were between 10 and 16, and the other 40% were 45 or older. And Pop Buell says everything in between is dead or seriously wounded. You know, I mean, the numbers of people who were Hmong who were killed, I mean, it goes from, you know, Roger Warner in Shoot the Moon, he says 30,000, but, you know, I mean, I'm not saying that these time frames are all the same, but, you know, and other things as many as 100,000. So what difference whether it's 10% of the population at that time or 25%? Huge losses. I mean, these were just, you know, so was it you know, did we drag them into it, or would that have happened anyway? I mean, you know, the North Vietnamese wanted that area for they were going to take over, you know, Laos anyway. I mean, but to start with, they're just trying to protect their pipeline of supplies. But, you know, what would have happened on down the road? It's a question. You know, it bothers me when I hear it, because I don't have an answer for it, and I really don't want to think about, you know, did we really drag them in, and all these horrible losses, that had we not been there, that it wouldn't have happened. You know, I can't tell you. I don't know, but I think that, you know, it was all set in concrete anyway, you know, at the end of 54. So I don't know, you know. Well, I'm Gene Hamner. My name is spelled Gene, G-E-N-E, and last name is Hamner, H-A-M-N-E-R. And I was a forward air controller, otherwise known as a FAC in short. I was a nail FAC at Nakhon Phanom, Thailand from August of 1970 to August of 71. And then I was a Raven FAC in Luong Prabang, Laos from August of 1971 or September, right in that area, to April of 72.
How often do you still fly?
No, I don't fly at all anymore. I crop dusted for 35 years, and you know, my last day of flying, I had 3 takeoffs and 2 landings, and my wife came and got me at the hospital, and you know, so she said, "You're done." I said, "I'm done." I said, "That's more than enough." I mean, 23,000 hours of flying time, and what can you do with flying a 172 around the skies, you know?